Bueno, pues vamos a continuación a inaugurar la segunda de las mesas redondas. Como ha dicho Javier Marcos, aunque yo lo voy a presentar a él también, la mesa va a ser fundamentalmente en inglés, pero bueno, ya hemos visto que efectivamente la mayor parte de la audiencia habla muy bien inglés, lo cual me congratula, la verdad, ver este nivel tan alto de inglés en la sala. Pero bueno, si hay algún problema, cualquier cosa, lo que queremos los organizadores es que estemos todos cómodos, que la participación sea alta, lo estamos consiguiendo. Si alguien se encuentra un poquito más o no entiende algo más complicado, pues nos lo dice y entre Javier y yo, buenamente, pues iremos traduciendo simultáneamente o mejor al final, ¿no? Y así es más dinámico todo. No, realmente a Elio y a Linda los presentamos a lo largo del Congreso, con lo cual yo, para cederles más tiempo, que todos estáis deseando escucharlos, no simplemente, bueno, pues nos hemos constituido como mesa, no los presento, los presentamos el otro día y los conocéis todos. Javier Marcos los conocéis todos también, porque es una cara de las más conocidas de Internet y a todos los seguidores del mundo de Juego de Tronos, pues no necesita tampoco presentación, así que simplemente por una cuestión de cortesía los organizadores cuando lo invitamos pues lo presentamos también, no vaya a ser él que sea el único que no se presente en este congreso. Y lo que sí me gustaría también señalar es que yo creo que efectivamente aquí la mesa es muy interesante porque la academia, que ha llegado como siempre después al mundo de Juego de Tronos, que los que lo viven y los fans, los seguidores, muchos, la mayoría, yo entre ellos, cuando preparé mi presentación anterior, usamos sus materiales, pues porque la mayor parte de vosotros, si habéis visto Los 7 Reinos, han aparecido muchas imágenes. Ellos son, Javier es en buena medida protagonista de todas esas creaciones y por tanto creo que merece que lo destaquemos aquí. Yo no voy a decir más nada, luego tengo preguntas, queremos hacerlo como ha sido la mesa redonda anterior, al final de una forma más fluida, pero a modo estamos cerrando el Congreso y quería además agradeceros a todos, tanto las instituciones como el público, los inscritos, vuestra magnífica participación. Yo tengo que deciros que estoy absolutamente encantado de haber compartido una experiencia, y hablo de mí, como estamos hablando, en lo personal, haber compartido con Rosa Moreno, con Cristina Rosillo, con Alfonso Álvarez Osorio, estos momentos, muchísimos momentos, 1 año y medio de preparación, 80 comunicaciones se presentaron, 40 se eligieron, las invitaciones a las mesas, las presidencias, ha sido mucho trabajo, pero de verdad que personalmente, y creo que también en nombre de los organizadores, ha sido un placer y sobre todo el placer es ver el resultado que está teniendo y quería decirlo porque además nosotros que nos hemos dedicado al mundo de recepción, es decir, a cómo bueno, pues cómo se recibe en el ámbito cultural contemporáneo productos del pasado, las recepciones de lo antiguo, estamos ahora entrando en una vía que es potentísima, que es la cultura popular, la cultura de masas, entendida en el buen sentido, y aquí hay un filón extraordinario. Hace unos años Rosa y Cristina organizaron aquí mismo unas sesiones sobre esto. Alfonso y yo hicimos un congreso internacional hace 5 años sobre la actualidad del mundo antiguo que se publica ahora y dedicarnos a Juego de Tronos yo creo que ha sido una gran idea y sobre todo por la acogida que le habéis dado. Porque si hay algo que me ha quedado claro después de todo este tiempo, aunque ya más o menos me lo tenía claro, es que Juego de Tronos es ya hoy un clásico moderno, se ha convertido en una obra clásica, es un clásico y como dice o como escribió hace tiempo uno de mis autores favoritos, Italo Calvino, un clásico permite numerosas aproximaciones y análisis distintos. Los clásicos además son obras, como le pasa a Juego de Tronos, tanto la novela y también la serie, que pueden leerse, releerse, verse en muchas ocasiones. Cada visita es una visita nueva, cada lectura aporta cosas nuevas. Entonces, realmente estamos aquí ante una obra que ya tiene realmente ese estatus de clásico. está en nuestro imaginario, está más allá de que la hayan leído, incluso no la hayan leído, pero la conoces. En esos marcadores de certidumbre que compartimos todos son frases que ya conocemos, aunque sean personas que no han visto la serie o no hayan leído los libros. Todo el mundo dice, se acerca el invierno, son frases que están ahí. Y creo, y ese es el sentido último de esta mesa, que en un mundo como en el que vivimos hoy en día, el seguidor, el fan, ha tenido mucho que ver en erigir a Juego de Tronos como un clásico contemporáneo. Antes los clásicos surgían mucho más del ámbito de los organizadores de este Congreso, del ámbito de la Universidad, y sin embargo hoy en día, gracias a, bueno, pues a los sistemas, sobre todo a la Internet y a los sistemas más globales con los que contamos, la opinión de los seguidores se tiene mucho más en cuenta, con lo cual Juego de Tronos es ya un clásico contemporáneo y quizá un clásico contemporáneo elegido por los lectores y por las personas que han visto la serie, con lo cual yo creo que la mesa redonda como final de este proceso es especialmente interesante si la contextualizamos así. Y ya me callo, que he hablado más de lo que quería, pero muchas gracias y les cedo la palabra a Javier y Elio.
Muchísimas gracias. Thanks a lot for your words. Game of Thrones, as you know, is a social phenomenon. It has break all the records. It's the most viewed show in the world. Okay, it's right. HBO does not know the exact numbers of how many people is watching Game of Thrones, but according to James Heber from Entertainment Weekly, the cipher is around 100 million viewers. Game of Thrones has also the record of most Emmys in a TV show ever, 47, with one season yet. That is going to win even more trophies, so it will end with maybe 52, 53 Emmys. That is insane. After season 6, he was already the TV show with most Emmys, and after season 6 came 2 more seasons, so I think it will be unbreakable, the record that Game of Thrones will achieve. And just we are talking about communities here. Game of Thrones, the Long Night episode, is officially the most tweeted thing, according to Twitter, about a scripted episode of TV, with almost like 8 million tweets. But all started with some books. George, I think most of you already know the history of A Song of Ice and Fire. George started writing a story that, according to his word, was impossible to adapt. In 1991, you know, he was a writer. He was writing a lot of science fiction, a lot of terror. You can feel that Martin loves terror in his work, fantasy. And then after that, he went to Hollywood, and he started to work in Hollywood. He worked in The Beauty and the Beast. But after interesting, maybe not successful story in Hollywood, he returned to his house in Santa Fe, and he said to write like the biggest story ever, a story, I repeat, he said it was impossible to adapt in 1991. In 1993, we have a nice letter of him that when he was thinking it was going to be a trilogy. In that letter, for example, there was no Red Wedding, Catelyn Stark was going to die beyond the wall, Arya Stark, Jon Snow and Tyrion Lannister were in a love triangle, so it was a bit weird. But finally, he changed his mind, and in 1996 he published A Game of Thrones. The book was too long, so that book transformed into 2 books. Clash of Kings appeared in 1998, and that book was also too huge, and he published the continuation, A Storm of Swords, in 2000. But even before the release of A Storm of Swords, some fans were creating a platform that would gather all the community of A Song of Ice and Fire. So enter here Elio, García, and Linda Antonsson, and the story of Westeros.org. So I have talked too much. What's the story of Westeros.org?
Well, we started really early on. Our idea was we had met online on a role-playing game, and we wanted to create a similar game based in Westeros because we had started reading the books and fell in love with them immediately. So we contacted George and asked his permission to use his world to create a little role-playing game. And at the same time, we started creating resources for what we mostly imagined would be future players of the game, but also as they started to grow, resources for fans of the series. And in some ways, we were inspired by what we had seen within the fandom of The Wheel of Time, Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time, that we had also been fans of, and we had seen some of the things that fans did.
Creo que es mejor no traducirles y avanzar la charla y así tenemos más tiempo para preguntas. I think it's better to not translating them and just follow the presentation, and at the end you can make more questions. So there was a long wait because A Stone Was Sword was released in 2000. From 2000 to 2011, we got only 2 books in 11 years. Remember, we were having one book in 96, one book in 98, one book in 2000. We had 3 books in 4 years, but after that, only 2 books in 11 years. Okay, we got the Duncan stories that are absolutely amazing. You should totally read them if you haven't, because they are also not. They are now all together in El Caballero de los Siete Reinos and Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, published by Gigamesh too, with Cristina Macian's translation, of course. So, but there was a huge change in the fandom because we were at the beginning we were receiving the books like 2 years a new book, 2 years a new book, and after that. It's interesting that from 11 years we got only 2 books because in the first book that was published in A Fish for Crows, half of the main characters didn't appear. We had to wait 11 years to read about the continuation of Jon Snow's story, Daenerys Targaryen's story, Tyrion Lannister's story, the 3 biggest main characters of the books, plus Bran Stark, that is the first episode of the book. Our main characters didn't have a single line. We couldn't know everything about them, except if you read some chapters that George read at conventions. We were 11 years without knowing anything about those main characters of A Song of Ice and Fire. So I want to again ask them, how was that long wait for 2000 to 2011, the wait between A Storm of Swords and A Dance with Dragons?
I would say the wait was, I mean, you started to see the people who were getting upset about it. You started to get them online, the grumblers and the complainers, the people who started attacking George and then attacking people they saw as connected to George, so we got our share of trolls. That was unfortunate. The way I've always seen it, because I've never been upset about it, and for me it's because I have something like 30,000 posts on our forum. Wow. And I just think about all the hours I've had of enjoyment of reading the books, discussing the books, arguing about the books with other people. It's like, I would, if you put me in a movie theater and you had me watch just all the best movies for a year straight without anything else, I would still not have the same amount of entertainment I've gotten from these books. So I don't understand that, but yes, people got frustrated. People anticipated a lot, and I think it caused the fandom to sort of start developing in different directions.
Okay, but the TV show Game of Thrones appeared. As you know the story, George R. Martin sold the rights of the adaptation of A Song of Ice and Fire to HBO in 2007. When he sold the rights, he was expecting to finish the books before the show would be over. Remember, in 2007, A Fish for Crows was released in 2005. In an infamous note at the end of A Fish for Crows, George wrote, and that's his story, okay, you will enjoy Dance with Dragons next year. And 2006 came, and Dance with Dragons didn't come. And then came 2007, 2008, 2009, and we had to wait to 2011 to actually Dance with Dragons. It's a very sad story, as they have said. So, the TV show appeared, and a pilot was started in 2008. It was filmed in 2009. Apparently, it was a disaster. Recently, the script of that pilot was released, and actually, the script wasn't really bad. I guess that the bad thing was the directing, maybe, or the locations. So the pilot was redone in 2010, and the show finally aired in 2011. Remember, it's a very long process between the rights of the adaptation were sold until the show actually aired. The show was praised since the first season, but didn't get the universal acclaim of most popular show until season 3 and The Red Wedding. I remember perfectly when the show first appeared, the most popular thing on HBO was True Blood, the show about vampires. It got a bigger audience than Game of Thrones. So for me, the key point, the cornerstone is The Red Wedding. And from that, of course, Ned Stark's death in season 1 was really crushed a lot of souls and destroyed the lives of many people. But the thing that really, I think, made the difference with Game of Thrones is The Red Wedding. I also think that the ending of Breaking Bad and the ending of Mad Men also helped Game of Thrones because, the top of the spot for the TV shows was empty, and Game of Thrones was always the second in command after Mad Men and after Breaking Bad had the chance to actually jump to the top spot. And then happens something very interesting that for me is like the reason why I sent a paper in order to prepare this panel, because we have two communities in collusion, and I repeat, there are two communities because they are not the same. It's not the same a book reader that a show watcher. A new community formed by the Game of Thrones show fans was created. Some of them were readers of A Song of Ice and Fire. Most of them were not. I am sure you know a lot of friends that watch Game of Thrones, and most of them have not read the books. You have to try to convince them to please read the books because they are better. But that is a reality. There is many people. I'm not so there as to say a percentage, but more than half, maybe a lot of people, more 60%, 70% of the people that watch the show, even more, has not read the books. But A Song of Ice and Fire community, of course, was really, really big. It grew a lot after the show aired. It's not confirmed data, but we can more or less agree that in 2011, only 12 million A Song of Ice and Fire books were sold. And it reached, according to Adam Whitehead, that is a personal friend of George R. Martin, and he's a writer too. According to him, it reached 90 million in 2018. Alberto from Gigames before said the data in Spain. If you remember what he said, in Spain in 2011 we had like 300,000, I think he said, and now we have almost 1.5 million books read in just 7 years, so the growing was insane. For me, it's very important regarding how we consider those communities. Book readers were very nice people. They kept the secrets of the show during the first season. They didn't spoil to the non-readers the plot that they have already read years before. I haven't heard a single show watcher that was saying, oh, my friend that read the books already spoiled me the Red Wedding, because nobody did that. I think the book readers were very, very respectful with them. I remember in our podcast, De Hielo y Fuego, when we were talking about the spoilers, Carlos Lorenzo, the director, that is somewhere here or outside, I don't know, we say, okay, now we're going to talk about the spoilers. And then we play The Rings of Customer, and after Rings of Customer finished the song, we actually talk about the spoilers, about what would happen in the show, that we knew what was going to happen because it happened in the books. So now started a growing fandom. We got, for example, the Wikias. As you know, Elio, García, and Antonsson not only are, George Martin said that, the people that know Westeros even better than him, and of course the authors of The World of Ice and Fire with Martin, but they are also the responsibles of A Wiki of Ice and Fire. A Wiki of Ice and Fire is absolute reference for any people that wants to know what's happening really in the books. They have also a companion app, an app for the smartphone, but you have also the wiki in a lot of languages. Here I'm showing the image of the Spanish wiki that it's really amazing. I know the people who actually do them, and they are absolutely experts in the books, and the community, the small forum community of the Wiki De Hielo y Fuego is also amazing. We have also, I will now ask them about what do you think about that I will present like the different type of fandom that have created the show and the books, because for me it's very different approaches that from, I love how to study different communities in the world, not only about Game of Thrones, and for me it's the creation of very different communities. Every community with a single difference is for me very interesting. For example, website like Watchers on the Wall. Watchers on the Wall is focused in the show. Okay, if the new book is released, they talk about the book. If George says something really important, they will talk about it, but it's mostly focused in Game of Thrones content about the TV show. And we have, for example, things like Tower of the Hand, that is totally the opposite. Of course, Tower of the Hand, when the show is airing, what the show airs is talking about the show, but the main focus of Tower of the Hand are essays about the books, analyze about the books, and it's a very interesting approach. The website that I admin, Los Siete Reinos, with my friend Jesus Navarro, we try to do both things. We talk about the show, we talk about the books, we have a lot of essays about the books, but we also try to post the news about the show. So we try to, because we are the reference in Spanish, we are the biggest website in Spanish language and biggest website in Europe about Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire. Our motto is we do not just read, we watch the show, but we also read. So we try to combine those things, but for me it's very interesting the approach of focusing only in the show or only in the books. And of course I have to talk about podcasts, all the transmedia thing. I'm a member of Podcast De Hielo y Fuego, but there are a lot of amazing podcasts, in English. I am a patron of like 5 English podcasts about Game of Thrones. Nota Podcast, Gas Gone Canon, Radio Westeros, History of Westeros, Boiler Audio Hour. There are tons of amazing podcasts about Game of Thrones and about A Song of Ice and Fire, for example. My favorite podcasts are not about Game of Thrones, but about A Song of Ice and Fire. Every podcast, they discuss a single episode of the book. For example, the podcast is called Tyrion 7 8 Game of Thrones, and they discuss 1 hour and a half, just one chapter of the book. That shows us how really amazing are the books that George Martin has created. So I want to ask the leaders of the community, as Elio and Linda are, how they have seen how this amazing fandom with different, as I say, website, podcasts, wikias have grown in the last years.
It certainly exploded with the advent of the show and the growing popularity of the show. And as we see, not just in English, even if that is the side that, of course, we're most familiar with. I guess we know second most about really the Spanish fandom. There's actually not much of a native Swedish fandom. There aren't any forums, as far as I know, actually, or anything like that, because most of the Swedish readers do use the English resources instead. So I guess it's more specialized when you get to English, because there are already so many fans there. So there you get more of a niche. You get show-specific websites, you get book-specific websites, you get all these podcasts that have different directions. We've certainly seen on the forum that as the show has progressed and passed the books, we get more and more of just primarily book readers. The first seasons, we were the main forum out there, so we had an enormous increase in the numbers of our members. Before the show started, we were around 12,000, and we're now over 100,000. Most of that increase was in the early years, when that was the only source for people. And then as, opinions have divided on the show, those who were purely about the show and very positive towards the show have tended to migrate to other forums.
A lot of years have passed, but we have not got the Winds of Winter, but we got the World of Ice and Fire, and we got Fire and Blood. So how fans reacted to this thing, that we didn't get the book that was promised, but we got 2 companion books that are absolutely amazing?
Obviously there were some people very upset about the fact that George worked on these. Now, a point to be made about the World of Ice and Fire was the contract was signed in 2006, 2 years before HBO optioned Game of Thrones. So it was done because the several publishers actually thought that it would be a good idea after a source was time to do a book that was a series guide. And then, we didn't work on it. I mean, we did work on our own, but George didn't work on it until he was basically done with A Dance of Dragons. So that's from 2006 when the contract was signed to 2012 or so. George didn't, we just waited for George. George's actual involvement, he worked a few months on it, it's absolutely true. He wrote a lot of material. The contract was 50,000 words. Our own part, just that we had done by ourselves, waiting for George, was 70,000. We had to expect to get a bunch of notes from George and to write more. George didn't do notes. George did sidebars, but his sidebars were, the first sidebar was supposed to be like a little chunk of text like this, was 6,000 words long. That was Aegon's conquest of the 7 kingdoms. And the next sidebar was a bit longer. The next sidebar was even longer, and until we come to Dance of Dragons, that was 60,000 words. That's a short novel by itself. So in the end, we had 350,000 words. So Lynn and I suddenly had to compress it all down to 180,000. Fire and Blood grew out of that. The material we couldn't use became Fire and Blood, except George also added one king that he kind of skipped, was Jaehaerys, the Old King, and that whole section is pretty much new. A lot of fans have really enjoyed it. A lot of fans have said they can see, like, this has inspired them to think, okay, this is why HBO should do a story about the Dance of the Dragons next, or why they should do Aegon's Conquest next. Other fans were not so happy, but it was very funny. After George published Fire and Blood, he actually, he had been quiet a long time. other than discussing the book with him, but after it was published, he actually mailed and is wondering, did you guys like it, and did the fans like it, and with the response, and our forum was full of people talking about all this new information and trying to make sense of it, and so Queen Alessani's dragon didn't want to cross the wall. What does that mean for magic, and what does it mean when Danny crossed the wall in the TV show? Should that have happened? So it's very exciting.
I've actually seen a number of people lately on Twitter saying that, I don't really worry that much about whether the next 2 books come out. I want to read more of the history, not necessarily because they've seen a version of it in the HBO show, but because they've actually gotten so enamored with the whole history of Westeros. And I think I've actually had, not that I don't want to see the next 2 books, because I really do, but when you're worrying really a lot about what's going to happen to the characters, history is sometimes a little safer. It's like the reader says, he prefers the history to read about it, because it's written in ink. Then when it's when you're living it, it's written in blood, and that's much less pleasant.
Game of Thrones is not now the most popular cultural product in the world, only compared with Star Wars and Marvel. The first 2 are Spanish politicians, Pablo Iglesias and Cristina Cifuentes, Donald Trump. I want to talk because they are. It's now everywhere. Game of Thrones. It's in politics. Christoph has an amazing conference on Thursday about the tours and how the heritage of Westeros that has created. From Jesus Cancino has also talked about that, how when a place is chosen to be a part of Game of Thrones, how it has influenced the history of the place, and he has developed very interesting ways how to use the fact that a TV show, a very popular TV show, was filmed there, how they have used it. Of course, the academy, the scholars, the university have also tried to study Game of Thrones. That's why we have a congress like this one. Of course, popular culture has also embraced the show. We have the cameos, for example, of Ed Sheeran in Game of Thrones. And it translated even other shows, even shows that are not really linked or have a relationship with HBO. That guy is from The Office, one of the biggest shows ever, and he's a total nerd for Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is everywhere. So I wanted to ask you again, as you that when you knew the books in 1997, when nobody knew them, how do you feel now, for example, that your president, of your country is doing memes with Game of Thrones and everything related?
Not too happy with that one. Neither was HBO. I have to point out they put out a statement that they don't want themselves pulled into politics. And of course, George responded with his own image. So it's amazing. It's when it was announced, we thought, man, it's amazing. It probably won't go more than a season or 2 because it's such a niche thing. And here we are, I guess 9 years later or whatever. But it's finishing up with this huge attention. Maybe too huge attention, but as maybe the expectations that were raised aren't going to be met for some people. I'm ambivalent a bit about it. But the best thing that's come out of it is so many more people know the books. Not great for George in some ways. I mean, great in money. Other ways. The money is great. It allowed him to do many things that he's wanted to do, like support local artists and start scholarships. Yeah. So
and the whole thing.
Yeah, everything. All he's done is great. But on the other hand, he says, he can't go out in public anymore without being mobbed by people. And that's something that he kind of misses. But such is fame and fortune.
Fan community is also reaching the next level. We have here, for example, of our podcast 200 of Podcast Hielo y Fuego that happened in Osuna this year. I think all of you have seen the Burlington Bar reaction. People gathering as a community. For me, it's very interesting. They gather as a community in order to watch a Game of Thrones episode, like if they would watch the Super Bowl or the Champions League final. And because it's very interesting, you have to live with this experience with people. I remember thinking time ago, where I will live the ending of Game of Thrones. because I don't want to be alone in my house. I live alone, and I don't want to live it with my parents because my parents don't watch the show. My friends are as geek as me. They won't be up at 3 a.m. to watch the show. So I was very, very lucky that Movistar Plus, in fact, invited me to live the final episode with them. I was very lucky because HBO didn't anything in Spain. And it's interesting, not only in Spain, of course. These are photos from the Ice and Fire Con, a lot of fans gathering. Also, communities I talked before about the academy, the university doing a congress like this about Game of Thrones, but also fans has written like very amazing books analyzing the show and the books, very deep studies of the characters, people from this congress, people that historians, economists, archaeologists doing an amazing research of how the real themes of A Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones. So it was really, really amazing. To be honest, I don't think that any show ever, or any books, well, books we can say Tolkien, of course, but have reached this level of connection and has reached the next step. We are not just fans, we are not just a community that watches the show and reads the book. We are people that are actually doing very interesting things if you analyze that from a sociology point of view, how we have evolved as a community. And I want to ask you about international fandom, because in the beginning you were in Sweden, you knew the books, you were in the US, you knew the books, but it was like very local scene. You are having very lucky, you have traveled to many places in the world and you have seen like very different fandoms. How would you explain to us that we are Spaniards, we are very passionate, how they feel A Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones in other places of the world?
It's been really remarkable. I mean, the first forum was hosted by some guy in Australia.
Oh.
So Dragonstone was the very first fan forum on the internet long ago, and we had people from all over even then. We had some Brits and some Americans. But it has grown massively. We've had the pleasure of visiting Spain, where I think the most passionate fans in the world are. I really think the Spanish fans are just a cut above. We've had the pleasure of being hosted by Northern Ireland's tourism board to visit Northern Ireland and see the sites and meet the people who've worked on it. And they take great pride, just as the people in Osuna have taken great pride in having been a home to Game of Thrones. And we get, George is now known everywhere. I know he's been invited. I mean, he's been to Japan. He was invited in the past to China. He was in Russia, he's been in Mexico, he's the world over. Game of Thrones is known and loved, and I think all the fans around the world kind of express their love of it in similar ways.
Linda, you as a Swedish, because John Martin is American.
It's interesting, the fact that it hasn't been that huge in Sweden, actually. I mean, it is a really popular TV show. The Swedish books, once they've tried 3 times to publish the books in Swedish, actually. The first 2 times failed. The publisher stuck with it and tried a 3rd time, this time not splitting the books in 2, which had been a problem previously. And obviously the show helped. But the Swedish fandom is sort of, because English is so very common, it is weird that the native fandoms don't tend to develop in the same way. People go to English forums. We do have sort of hardcore science fiction fantasy fans that are involved in like Worldcon and Eurocon and organizing these things. There's been talk of trying to bring something like that to Sweden, but I do find that there's actually a bit of a lack of a Swedish fandom, because so many of them just follow the English sources, the English forums and all that.
But Game of Thrones, I am very sorry, ends tomorrow. The script could be better, we know that, but the direction, the acting, makeups, visual effects, music, costume, photography, sound editing, locations, we have Jesus from Asuna, is simply, regarding the technical aspect, the biggest show ever. If Game of Thrones is the TV show with most Emmys, it's not because of the directing or the acting is because of the technical stuff, you know, the makeups, the costumes. Ramin Djawadi worked with the music, Michelle Clapton worked with the costumes, all the special effects team. In Spain we have like 2 different special effects teams that has worked with the show, Ranchito and even those before. For example, in Game of Thrones, when Arya shoots an arrow, there is no arrow, it's created by CGI. The guy who created that arrow is a Spanish guy, so we cannot imagine how much level of detail Game of Thrones has. That, for example, I place here the image of the Dance of the Dragons in the 3rd episode of the last season. You were watching the show and you didn't realize, because this is a bit of a trump, because we increase the light of this scene, but it's amazing. This is Hollywood. This is not a TV show. This is something you have to pay 12 euros in the cinema in order to watch it. So it's very interesting, because I will ask you later about the spin-offs, about the recent Winds of Winter, but what do you think will happen now that the show for many people, the show of our lives has ended?
There's a word called in Swedish called kalabalik. So it's my favorite word, kalabalik, in Swedish. It's not really a Swedish word. It has a very interesting history. It's a Turkish word from a time that a Swedish king, who was it Charles XII?
Yes.
Yes, Charles XII, who was a very warlike king, ended up fighting sort of the Russians, and he ended up basically with some troops in the Ottoman Empire, and he was a guest kind of the Ottoman emperor, but the locals didn't really like the Swedes being there, and eventually they rioted against the Swedes and attacked them, and the king and I think his hat got shot off his head, and since then we have the kalabalik, a word for meaning sort of a riotous or a chaotic situation. And I think after the show, it will be kalabalik. It will be a bit chaotic with reactions, with what's next. We've seen every major producer of content, Netflix, Amazon, all these others trying to find the next Game of Thrones. Yeah. So it's going to be a very interesting time to see what rises to the top and what doesn't.
And I don't think that anything has quite the same. It's going to be difficult for another show to capture something similar, especially since we're seeing more and more shows moving to releasing all episodes for binge watching, and that never builds up the same kind of audience, the same talk between each episode. So I think that it's going to be tough to get anything like Game of Thrones to happen again. I think the same is probably true for any of the spin-offs.
Yeah, I will ask you about the spin-offs. George commented 2 weeks ago that from the 5 projects, Brian Coleman was signed by Amazon, but 3 are still going. And the first one, the tentative title is called Blood Moon. Started filming actually this week in Northern Ireland. They will come to Spain to film too in Canary Islands in like I think 3 or 4 weeks. It's very interesting because we Spanish fans have both got Game of Thrones plus at least the first spin-off. So you have been to ask about this a lot of time, but what is your impression about the spin-offs, and that the spin-off that was chosen was the Long Night spin-off called Blood Moon? What do you think about it?
I just read this morning an interview of Casey Blois, the new sort of programming head of HBO, and he actually said that it starts filming in June. I think it was The Mirror, which is a tabloid, is the one that said it already started
Watchers
filming.
on the Wall say that, and I trust the Watchers guy, that maybe it's pre-production.
If they're doing, yeah, it's probably pre-production. I know that the pre-production has already started. So, what do we think of it? I think, as Casey Blois said in his interview, the chances that a spin-off will become as popular as Game of Thrones are not great. But they said, we would be crazy not to try, especially with such an amazing universe that George R.R. Martin has created. So I think I'm hopeful that they will approach it with the right sense of trying to capture what was in the books that people loved, what was in those early seasons that people loved, getting the themes and the tone right. And Jane Goldman, who is the showrunner of this Long Night, HBO didn't want George to call it that, but he keeps calling it The Long Night. So that's an unofficial title. Blood Moon is like a working title, I guess. That show, she has a lot of experience. She's done a lot of adaptations. Her adaptation work, she's adapted Neil Gaiman to the screen. She's adapted with Matthew Vaughn various superhero works. She's very talented. George has said she was very good when they met and talked. So I think there's reasons to be hopeful. There are other reasons maybe to be a little concerned, some of the language of how they described one of the characters as a socialite. And this is supposed to be a setting where it's sort of a Bronze Age, less modern setting. They didn't really have socialites in, Mycenae or Thebes back in. So that one I found a little strange, but that's just the language for talking to the public. It may not really represent what's going on.
We are just going to to end the panel, but do you think will more people read The Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring after this ending of the show?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So we are just finishing. Questions for the public, but please always be nice to George.
Bueno, muchas gracias por esta magnífica entrevista y tenemos muchas preguntas. Todos los alumnos me han dicho que quieren hablar, preguntarle. And I think that we should do the effort to translate in this case, okay? So
yes.
Let's be fluid in the questioning and answering so that we can all participate. But since I'm the chairman, I'm going to take first place, if you don't mind. This is something that I can do because I'm here. And I wanted to ask you, and it's really something, I would say, aiming to the heart, not so much to the mind. And I would like to know, out of this long process it's really part of who you are now, of your personal history. Is there a personal experience, a moment that you treasure higher than the rest, something really, really special in all this long history of your relation with the books?
Well, maybe it is that chapter in A Dance with Dragons. When we were reading, we had an advanced copy of the manuscript of A Dance with Dragons, and we were reading it together, more or less, passing the pages back and forth from
the computer, actually.
Was it on the computer?
Yeah.
It was on the computer, okay, so that one we didn't have to pass back and forth, okay. So we got more or less at the same time to Bran's chapter in A Dance with Dragons, where he meets the three-eyed crow. And when we started reading the description of the Pale Lord in ebon finery, we both squealed simultaneously, "Oh my God, it's Bloodraven!" Just that George would put something like that in there that really was for people who had read the Dunk and Egg novellas. It was one of those incredibly geeky fan moments.
Bueno, les he preguntado, como sabéis, pero traduzco rápido, que ellos llevan tantos años con esta novela que en realidad es parte de su vida, ¿no? Y son individuos que han vivido con ella, y les preguntaba un momento especial, ¿no? Y creo que lo habéis entendido, pero se refieren sobre todo a un momento de la lectura de Danza de Dragones, ¿no? Cuando además la leían en el ordenador, ¿no? Habéis dicho, y que cuando Bran se encuentra, ¿no?, con el Three-Eyed Raven, que
Cuervo de tres ojos.
Eso, con el Cuervo de tres ojos. Y ahí tienen un momento, ¿no?, de revelación especialmente íntimo, ¿no?, íntimo porque ellos conocen a través de las novelas de...
Los cuentos de Anquier, sí.
Es que yo la he leído en inglés, entonces totalmente los nombres no me los sé. Pero sí, bueno, son momentos íntimos que yo creo que todos hemos tenido, pero en Elio y Linda especialmente, ¿no?, que son los que han escrito también con Martin, pues... bueno, son experiencias muy personales. Tenemos la palabra cedida ahora al público. Por favor, no os cortéis, ¿eh? Y si mientras os lo pensáis o no, yo también, no voy a hacer más preguntas, pero quería I'm not going to make a question directly to Elio and Linda, but I would like to mention, bueno, quiero comentaros que está también en la sala otra persona. Esto no quiero darle un sablazo a nadie, pero bueno, ya que está aquí Ian Watson, is here with us, and muchos de vosotros lo conoceréis porque es que somos muy afortunados y está siendo el día extraordinario porque Ian Watson es de los novelistas extraordinarios de ciencia ficción, fantasía, terror, muchos con seguridad habéis leído novelas suyas y ha sido guionista con Kubrick en Inteligencia Artificial. Me atrevería a decir, pero esto solamente es el que habla, que las mejores novelas de Warhammer 40.000 y de la serie Warhammer son firmadas por él, así que todos los que juguéis a ese mundo me asienten los alumnos porque saben a lo que me refiero. Y como en español recientemente, yo creo que, a lo mejor estoy equivocado, pero es del 2016 y debe ser de las últimas publicaciones en español, Gigamesh precisamente ha sacado con el título Incrustados, me parece que y otros delirios racionalistas, pues una de sus novelas primeras, ¿no? Y otros relatos. Así que I really don't want to assault you, but now that you are here and that we are so fortunate to have such a group of people and fans of the fantasy agenda, but I think that you can give another approach because you are a writer and also obviously a consumer of fantasy. But I don't know if you would mind to answer my question. How do you feel about this fan? How can I say the movement and the repercussion of it in during the last decades? I mean, how do you feel about it as a writer and also as a consumer as a reader also? Do you see a change in how we see the fantasy now? How we are going to see fantasy in the future? How are we going to produce fantasy in the future?
Okay, that is 6 questions.
Yes, I know.
This is the Elio and Linda hour, so I will very quickly say that I have been involved in science fiction fandom, not fantasy fandom, for 30 or 40 years since I first became a writer. And with Christina, we organize a science fiction, a primarily literary festival in the north of Spain, Celsius dos Tres Dos. And I see the fandom of Game of Thrones as an outgrowth from a fandom that already existed internationally in all countries of science fiction from decades ago. This does not apply to crime fiction. It does not apply to other forms of genre fiction, but it has been a way that people were part of an international family for a long, long time already. And that was the basis of Game of Thrones fandom, I think, just as a pizza has a base upon which you put the lovely toppings.
Yeah.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry for making 1 and 6 questions in one. Thank you very much. ¿Más preguntas? Jesús, adelante.
Lo primero de todo, gracias a los 3 y a los organizadores por organizar todo esto, porque la verdad está siendo una maravilla de congreso. Y sorry, my English accent is very, very bad, and I want to ask to Elio and Linda for some anécdota, no me sale la palabra.
Dilo en español si quieres y lo traducimos. Sí.
Preguntarles por alguna anécdota de George R.R. Martin.
Some anecdotes?
Some funny ideas about George. Funny stories about George.
Funny stories about George. Well, okay, here's one. When I first visited him, I first met him in 2004. That's when I was visiting with my family in the United States, and we were driving through New Mexico, and we got near to Santa Fe. And so he showed me, I went to his house, his office house. He has an office, and he's got a house, and the office is a house, and so he does his commute in the morning by walking across the street, because his house is across the street from his office. And he was showing me a piece of recent art that someone had done for T-shirts for Paris, which was the Targaryen dragon. I don't have it with me, but and he commented, the dragon has, the only problem is this dragon has 4 legs, and the dragons don't have 4 legs. Because it doesn't happen in real life. They have wings and they have 2 legs. That's And I pointed out to George, well, George, the Targaryen dragon we have in our heraldry and our shields has 4 legs, and it's the one that you liked a lot, and he thought it was great, and did it? I didn't notice the legs.
He also had it on his website, the shield.
Yes, that's right.
That we had made. He had that on his website, and he hadn't noticed that there were 4 legs there. So all the artists had looked at our heraldry and seen 4 legs. HBO had 4 legs in the dragon symbol that they made for the Targaryens.
For the pilot episode.
For the pilot episode, it was also 4 legs. So once we realized that, we had to go and amputate some legs on the dragons.
And I had one other, actually, so I also had the pleasure of visiting the filming of the first season with George. And so we were at Magnahorn Quarry.
This pic with the Meronese, with the Pentosi graph is from...
That's the pilot. Yeah, that's the first pilot. That picture... Boyd Rankin, who worked on who was an armorer on the show for the first 4 seasons, he took that picture and gave it to us, and then we shared it with George, and because George didn't have one of himself, so now he has a picture. As a magister of Pentos. But in the first season, so we went up to Magnahorn Quarry where they filmed Castle Black, and we had the scene where they were making the selections of the recruits to be different things. And we had Maester Aemon, all the stewards were brought to him, and Maester Aemon had a line where he's assigning Darien to Eastwatch by the Sea. You'll be working for Maester so-and-so, don't mention his nose. And after the film, George laughed, and we were listening and said, that line with the nose is really funny. Did I write that? And I shook my head and said, no, George, that's not from the books. And then he said, Elio, I don't know how you can remember these things.
Do you want the translation? Bueno.
Sí, ¿queréis que traduzcamos? Estáis bien, si no... Bueno, han hecho para ir más rápido, pero vamos, yo creo que la primera anécdota tiene que ver con las patas del dragón, que había que amputarle 2 porque eran 4 en un principio, y la segunda con cosas que, pasan en los sets y cosas que se incluyen, ¿no? Y que el propio George a veces, pues, claro, el fenómeno ha superado incluso su propia persona, entonces se incluyen cosas y no sabe si eso lo había escrito él, lo de la nariz grande, ¿no?
Sí.
Entonces, pues son episodios sorprendentes en la vida de un escritor, ¿no? Que aparecen cosas en tu obra que no has escrito tú, ¿no?
Thank you very much.
Venga, más...
Hi. Hello again. Question about development of the franchise in general. I think the history of big properties in media, etc., is that at some point diminishing returns sets in. And each new successive thing you add to it sort of, first of all, stops really adding any value and then starts declining a little bit. I needn't mention the Phantom Menace, need I? At what point do you think that, you'd have to be prepared for that here? Do you think there's a lot more that can go? There's still a big growth process, or do you think that growth is... at least slowing down or perhaps staying flat for a while?
I think that on the book side, there's much more room left in terms of exploring, more, like George has talked about, continuing like the Dunk and Egg stories. I don't see a problem with that. I don't see a problem with more exploration of his world as, the fake history. When it comes to TV franchises, they would have to be very clever to do something that that can really work because everything will be compared to Game of Thrones, and at the same time they can't just repeat the same story. So I think that the likelihood of really successful franchises is already very dubious when it comes to TV adaptations. Maybe they can get one more if they can come up with a spin that is, feels very much like Westeros, but isn't just a rehash. But after that, I don't see much more room, no?
Lo que ha preguntado por el futuro, ¿no?, de la franchise, ¿no? Y Linda contesta que ella ve, bueno, que hay futuro, pero que hay más futuro en la parte literaria, en los libros, que en toda la parte de media, ¿no?, de TV shows y demás, porque, bueno, pues es más complicado las secuelas y los spin-offs que se puedan hacer ahí. Habrá que ser más cauteloso, ¿no?, en la forma. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much.
Ha dicho que el éxito es dudoso, literalmente.
Sí, no saben si acertarán o no. Néstor, adelante.
I wanted to ask Elio and Linda about we have lots of plots, we have lots of histories that are not told, that have not been told yet. Not only on the SOF, but as well in the past of Westeros and Essos. Which one of those plots you prefer? Blackfire Rebellion? You prefer the plots we have not seen in Essos?
As in to be a new show, or just in general for George to expand on?
I think she's asking about what your favorite.
For George to expand on?
No, George.
Yeah, ours.
Yes, that's what we like best.
What we like best. I love the Targaryen histories, and also when we did the World of Ice and Fire, of course, we ended up having to cut down the regency of Aegon III, the Dragonbane, a lot. It was almost as long as the Dance of Dragons, and we cut it down to like 2 pages.
Wow, that is a spoiler for Fire and Blood too.
Yeah, so Fire and Blood has the whole thing, and we're so happy that people can see that. But if we wanted to talk in an area that George hasn't really explored very much, I would have been happy to get much more of a history of some of the free cities. Bravos, for example. I recently just read the new book by Guy Gabriel Kay, who is, after George, probably our favorite author who's working today. And it's set in a sort of a Renaissance Italy-like fantasy world, and it just made me. He's a brilliant writer, and it made me feel like Bravos is kind of like the Venice and the Amsterdam of the setting, and it would have a very fascinating history of. And we just get a segment of it that we were able to have in the World of Ice and Fire. So I would love to have more about that.
Also more, I think more of the Roynish history would be really interesting to have if he explores more in Essos. And I hope that at some point we also get the Doom of Valyria, because I'm really curious about what happened.
Sí, Néstor, ¿bien? Bueno, están haciendo, creo que lo estáis siguiendo todo, pero por si hay alguien despistado, lo que están es señalando aquellos apartados. Javier, tú si quieres añadir algo, hazlo, por favor. Algunos apartados que ellos creen que sí tienen mucho futuro literario también, como la propia Bravos, ¿no?, que además siempre se ha señalado como uno de esos escenarios tan atractivos, ¿no? Y Linda señalaba por último el final de Valeria, ¿no?, que todos estamos...
Ha hablado también de la trama de la historia de Dorne, que le parece muy interesante.
Muy interesante también. Es decir, posibles vías, ¿no?, de seguimiento. ¿Más preguntas? ¿Tenemos todavía tiempo para alguna más? Por favor. Vamos, en realidad no tenemos tiempo para alguna más, pero estamos disfrutando, así que vamos a hacer el tiempo, ¿vale? No...
He said we don't have time, but we'll still do things.
Maybe a stupid question, but I want to know if you could say something to us about Fire and Blood Volume 2.
Well, contrary to fears of some people, George is not working on Fire and Blood Volume 2. I actually, in the last months, he's mailed us some questions for things, and some of them I thought I kind of thought, oh, maybe he's noodling some for the future for Fire and Blood Volume 2. No, there wins the winter questions because it's like, oh, if you're gonna do some Fire and Blood Volume 2, you know, I mentioned something to him. You know, if I were working on Fire and Blood Volume 2, there'd be a riot outside my house. So he's working on the wins of winter. But I really want to see the rest of Aegon III's story. George, it's really interesting to me in a lot of ways that the whole Dance of the Dragons and Aegon III's story exists in the form that we have it, because back when he published Ahead of Night, I pointed out a mistake he made in the timeline. He made Prince Baelor Breakspear too old at his death, and it didn't fit with everyone else before him, so George had to fix it. He changed Viserys II from being the brother of the youngest brother of Daeron the young dragon to being his uncle. And that changes having him. That whole story, if you've read Fire and Blood and Aegon's and Viserys' story, it comes out of that error being fixed. So I really want to see where it continues. I feel kind of like almost a personal connection because I was nerdy enough and nitpicky enough to point out the mistake. So it feels like that story is, I contributed a little to it. So.
Bueno, qué cosa tan interesante, ¿no? Dice, le preguntaban bueno, si podían decir algo sobre sangre y, no, Fire and Blood.
Fuego y sangre.
Fuego y sangre. Y dice, y cuenta Elio una anécdota interesante en la que él señaló incluso a un pequeño error a Martin, ¿no? Y cómo por eso él se siente cercano especialmente a esa obra, pero también ha dicho al principio, si no me he enterado yo mal, y creo que no me he enterado mal, es que no está trabajando en la segunda parte, o sea que ahora mismo. Que
yo he contado que yo le mandé un correo hace unos meses con algunas preguntas y les dijo, oye, esto es para... Lo cual es interesante. Esto es para Fuego y Sangre 2 y dicen, no, esto es para Vientos de Invierno. O sea, como que hay cosas que podrían estar relacionadas con Fuego y Sangre 2 que van a estar relacionadas con Vientos de Invierno. Y uno es lo que ha contado, por ejemplo, que Viserys II, Martin se equivocó, puso que era con un hermano de Daeron y de Baelor y no es tío suyo, ¿no? Recordemos que estás haciendo como mano del rey una serie de años y después de que Baelor el Santo y Daeron el Joven Dragón mueran, él llega a ser, tras haber sido mano, llega a ser un rey muy breve, pero muy interesante.
Bueno, nos queda una palabra por aquí y bueno, y a Miguel le vamos a dar también la palabra, pero ya, Christopher. Ahí.
Hi. It's definitely Game of Thrones kind of introduced like the fantasy and also sci-fi genre more into like a broader mainstream, because before that we say like oh, the geek and the nerd and the freaky culture, that was kind of a niche thing, and now it's kind of like entering the mainstream somehow through Game of Thrones. Do you think this is a kind of a good development or a bad development? Is this kind of superficial, or is it kind of there are like those concepts like cultural appropriation? Because now everybody's a geek and a nerd.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I grew up reading comic books. I love Marvel comics. I read I collected the initial Infinity War series. I used to think that would be so amazing to see all this stuff on the screen, and now I'm bored of it. I'm off the Marvel train. I've been off the DC train for a while. For me, a lot of it is it's become, sad to say, extremely corporate. It's the well-run train. Kevin Feige at Marvel, he's lauded as tremendous, and he's not really a creator, he's just a manager who just knows how to keep the trains running on time. Curators, yes. Yeah. And so to me, a lot of it is superficial. It is the corporate world finding a way to appeal to and take something that was niche and make it large. But you know, I don't want to sound like one of those people who says, well, I liked them before they were popular. I'm wonderful, but everyone's reading it and is familiar with it, and I'm glad everyone's taking great enjoyment in it. But there's a danger in that it just starts becoming commonplace. It no longer becomes special. Like when you have Amazon's Second Age series, Netflix's The Witcher,
the Wheel of Time
series at Amazon as well, and all these others at the same time happening, it just feels like
an oversaturation.
And it's no longer special. It's no longer a unique thing.
On the other hand, when you have something that goes really big, you get fun moments like Queen Elizabeth asked sort of if he wants to sit on the Iron Throne and having to decline it. So there's still, you know, these bizarre moments when you realize that, my God, everyone is, you know, somehow, you know, involved or touched by this thing, and you still have that extra feeling of amazement because you know, you were there from the beginning, and now all of a sudden there are commercials with, you know, Game of Thrones references everywhere, and, you know, Trump making Game of Thrones it's so all over, and it's still, you know, bizarre in a entertaining way.
The last thing I keep thinking about, like, what would Umberto Eco think of this whole thing, his Adventures in Hyperreality, where he talked about neo-medievalism and how you know, the fantasy literature was, you know, pulp literature is halfway between occultism and Nazi fascism. So I think he'd probably be rolling in his grave thinking about us devoting our time to this, and yet it's a way for people. It does bring people together, and it gives a chance for people to bring together point of views that they would necessarily ever have a reason to share with one another. At the same time, it just feels very surreal, very surreal.
Bueno, como tenemos mucha prisa, le voy a dar la palabra a la última persona que tú querías hablar, Miguel, y ya cerramos. Pues la respuesta ha sido muy larga, creo que la habéis entendido todos, pero hablaba de los peligros de que esto, bueno, y decían, resumiendo muchísimo, que Elio y Linda decían que, bueno, el peligro de que esto que comenzó siendo pues algo de culto, algo íntimo de unos cuantos, pues se convierta en algo de un lugar común, ¿no? Y pierda eso especial, ¿no? Que lo hacía único en cierta medida, pero a la vez también decía Linda, y resumo mucho, pero para aquellos que no hayáis seguido el inglés, decía que es verdad que pierde algo de eso íntimo y particular, pero a la vez permite que a la reina de Inglaterra se le diga o se le pida que se sienta en el trono de hierro, ¿no? Un poco, en fin, vamos rápido con quién. Miguel.
I wanted to ask that if after gathering all that information for a world of ice and fire and having this solid knowledge of how this world works and all, when reading new chapters or Fire and Blood or anything, do you feel like, do you make like a better context of all? Like when imagining like the castles and all that, you have literally write like the history of that region, like the ways that people live. Like you can very easily imagine how all is working, or at least like more deeply.
Yeah, I mean, that was a real goal that we had, but we hope we would share that with people, that you would feel that you knew more about the world, but when you know more about the world, there's also going to be inevitably more questions about the world. But now, you know, you don't know what you know until you know it, is kind of, I guess, the way I would put it. You don't know that there's things to ask questions about until you have enough context to ask questions about it. Before that point in time, the world is, you know, the horizon has been broadened, and everything that lies beyond it is kind of formless. And George has broadened enough that people can have, there's so many people, blogs and websites devoted to discussing just small aspects of the books. Or in Fire and Blood, George, as a throwaway, had this whole thing about the history of the publication of an erotic, pornographic text. And I realized when, like, with George, maybe he didn't realize it, but what he described suddenly changed my understanding of the whole spread of literature in the setting. I used to think...
You're talking about fat pink mass?
Yeah, no pink mass. But it was sort of like, we just thought it was acceptance and maesters would copy things, and that was it. And but he mentioned hired quills from the free cities, and I realized, okay, there's all these editions of this book. There's all variations. Why are there so many variations? Why are there so many editions? Maesters copy things faithfully. They wouldn't do this. Hired quills means that there's workshops of copyists in the free cities who will make copies of things speculatively. They have enough literature and enough literacy in their society, but they can, and enough wealth in their society to produce frivolous texts for sale, for profit. And that's a massive change from what we knew prior to Fire and Blood. So I think the world has definitely expanded, and I think and our own personal understanding of it has expanded as we worked on it.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias a todos. Well, I would like to finish now because we are a little behind, so to say. Well, little behind schedule. But I think it's been way worthy, and I would like to thank very much Javier, Linda, Elio for such a wonderful roundtable and for your comments. And thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you for inviting us.